Hello and welcome to this webinar on filtering for DSLs. If you're a technical colleague and you provide IT support to schools, then please do head over to our training portal where you will find a session that's much more suitable to your needs. So that contains the technical knowledge and technical support for how to set up filtering. Today we are focusing specifically on the role of the DSL and the key responsibilities that you have when it comes to filtering. Now, if you're an LGfL customer, you will know that you can get your filtering through us. We offer a network-based filter called School Protect, so that filters all devices connected to the network in school. And we also provide Home Protect, which is a device-based filter. So if you've got devices that go off-site, then Home Protect is the product that you would need on those devices. Now, in Keeping Children Safe in Education, it says that the DSL, the Designated Safeguarding Lead, is the lead in school for safeguarding, which includes online safeguarding, and that includes filtering and monitoring. And you might be thinking, well, why is that the case? I've got a perfectly great IT support colleague, and why doesn't this fit within their remit? Now, don't get us wrong, IT support people, technical colleagues are absolutely instrumental in setting up and making sure that filtering systems are effective and that they're functioning in the way that they should. However, these systems are there to protect users from harm, and so it makes sense that there needs to be a safeguarding-led approach to how these filtering systems are implemented. Sadly, we know of many examples of where children have been harmed and significant harm has been caused through their use of mobile technologies and online digital devices. So it's really important that in schools we get filtering right, and you as a DSL have a crucial role to play because you understand about safeguarding, you understand about the statutory guidance, you understand about contextual harm, and so it is that knowledge that needs to drive how the filtering systems are set up and what they are doing practically, operationally, to keep children safe in your school. A lot of what I will be signposting to and referencing today can be found on our webpage. So this is just a signpost that if you head over to safefiltering.lgfl.net, you will find various videos, resources, templates that will help you as a school with implementing robust, effective filtering. So in helping us to understand the role that a DSL has in filtering, it's really important that you are familiar with both Keeping Children Safe in Education and also the DfE standards for filtering and monitoring. We will be touching upon both of these documents throughout the session, but just to point out that Keeping Children Safe in Education, the statutory safeguarding guidance that we follow in schools, that has mentioned filtering and monitoring for a good number of years now. And that also mentions the DfE standards for filtering and monitoring. And the document that you can see on the right hand side here, there are 3 particular standards relating to filtering and a 4th that is specifically about monitoring. And we'll touch upon monitoring a little bit later to make sure we're all clear about what the difference is between filtering and monitoring, because they're quite distinct, quite different systems. Now, what I would suggest is that if you haven't seen the DfE standards for filtering and monitoring yet, then please do head over to the DfE page and have a look at those standards. You can see from the screenshot on the slide that these are 4 standards, but if you click on each of them, they will expand to give you more text. And the more text gives you information about how you can meet each of those standards and who has key responsibilities when it comes to each of them. In the DfE standards for filtering and monitoring, there is this core overarching standard which states that you have a responsibility to provide a safe online environment for your school or college with appropriate filtering and monitoring. And you may be asking yourself, what does appropriate filtering and monitoring look like? Now, that is a very specific term, and all providers of filtering and monitoring to schools need to submit a document to the UK Safer Internet Centre which says why we are appropriate and how we meet that benchmark. So if you're an LGfL school, head over to appropriate.lgfl.net and you will find the submission that we've made to the UK Safer Internet Centre, which gives you an overview of why our products are appropriate. If you're with another provider, then they too will have done that piece of work, and so if you go to the UK Safer Internet Centre, you will be able to find the submission made by your filtering provider. So do have a look at that, because it gives you some very high level information about what your filtering platform is capable of and how it will help you. School Protect and Home Protect, which are the LGfL products, are also accredited by the UK Safer Internet Centre. So we are one of a small number of providers that have gone through a rigorous process to be accredited by the UK Safer Internet Centre too. So again, hopefully giving you peace of mind that the products that you have are effective at keeping children safe. Although, having said that, an absolutely key principle of filtering in schools is that we provide you with a system, but it is how you use that system that is most important. How you've set it up. Are you reviewing it annually as you're supposed to? Are you doing regular checks? How do your IT support team communicate with your DSL? Have you got the key roles identified in your settings? Are you overblocking? These are all things that we'll talk about in the training, but I'm just trying to make the point that just having a product and having it turned on is not sufficient at making you compliant. That's why you really do need to be familiar with the DFE standards for filtering to understand what those expectations are on you as a school. And the overarching core standards in the DFE standards for filtering and monitoring, as you can see, talks about both filtering and monitoring. So this is a good time to just make that distinction between these two different systems. Now, filtering is very binary. It's about what do you block, what do you allow on your network or on your device. So it's about preventing users from accessing inappropriate, illegal, harmful content. It is purely about URLs, so web addresses, web pages that your users can or cannot get to. Monitoring, on the other hand, is a reactive system. It's a bit of software that sits on a device and it looks at what is going on the whole on that device. So it doesn't just look at URLs on websites. It might be looking at email, it will be looking at your apps, it will be looking at things that are written onto a Word document, for example, or a Google document. It is looking at all behaviour on a device, and it is looking for anything that is of concern and to flag that up to you as a DSL so that you can respond to that in a safeguarding manner. So they're very different systems, but of course there is synergy, and the two do work well together. One thing you may be thinking as I start to talk about filtering is, I'm a DSL, I'm a teacher, how on earth am I expected to understand whether our filtering is working as it should in school? And that's a really good question. If you're an LGfL customer, we have developed something called a health check, which we believe is really helpful for you as DSLs to get that overview of whether your filtering system is set up and working in the way in which you would expect. We call it a bit like a filtering MOT. As you can see on the screen, it is a series of statements and they are RAG rated red, amber, green and also blue. So anything that shows up on your health check on your School Protect portal as red is something that you need to have a look at, because it's potentially putting your pupils at risk, or it means that you're not compliant with the DFE standards. Anything in amber is definitely something for you to review as a school, and like we've already pointed out, it's not necessarily that you need to understand the technical know-how of each of these, but what this health check is trying to do is it's trying to flag up that these are things that need to be looked at and possibly resolved in your school. So from a DSL perspective, you'll be wanting to look at this health check and talk to your IT support or your technical colleagues about why you've got reds, ambers, and what you're going to do to resolve those and to make sure your filtering is set up effectively. Before I get on to looking at the individual standards, I wanted to just take a moment to point out that it's really important when we think about filtering to try and not think about it in a siloed way. It can feel quite daunting. I know many DSLs who say they don't feel that they have a lot of expertise around technical systems like filtering. The point is that you have the safeguarding expertise and you understand about what it means to have a whole school approach to safeguarding children. And we need to think about filtering in those terms too. So filtering is a technical system that will help you to block and allow websites, yes, but what else does it have an impact on, and what are the dependencies involved with filtering as well? So the relationship between things like filtering and your policies, because I'm sure you will have filtering incorporated into various policies such as your acceptable user policy, maybe your staff code of conduct, your safeguarding policy. So is it embedded in there? How are we responding to what's going on and captured through our filtering system to keep our policies up to date? How do we work with parents to talk to them about filtering, because they're likely to not have any filtering at all at home. And so how can we support them to set up controls in the home environment which will protect their children? Have we given staff information about filtering and what our expectations are of them? So if they come across a concern of a child accessing inappropriate content or an adult accessing inappropriate content, what will they do about that? What is the incident management procedure and process for that? So hopefully the examples I'm giving you give you a flavour of how filtering is just part of your safeguarding tapestry in school, and how it really can augment and support that whole school approach to safeguarding. So let's get into the standards then. The first one that we're going to explore is about how you need to identify and assign roles and responsibilities to manage your filtering and monitoring systems in school. This infographic gives you an overview of the other individuals who have a key role to play in making sure that filtering is effective in your school. So of course you as the DSL has a lead role, and you will need to be orchestrating and conducting some of this activity. But as you can see on the screen, as a school you need to have a lead governor for filtering and monitoring. So do you have that individual in place? What data do they look at to ascertain whether filtering and monitoring are effective in your school? What about your IT support colleagues, your technical input? How do you work with them? Because they will be the technical know-how, they will understand the systems. So how will you have ongoing regular communication with that team to make sure that your filtering system is being responsive and reflexive to what you need as a school population? So if, for example, your teachers are telling you that pupils are accessing something inappropriate, how are you going to liaise with your technical support colleagues to make sure that those websites are then blocked? So there needs to be regular opportunity for communication. And then of course all of your staff have a key responsibility too, in the fact that they are the people working directly with pupils, they are the eyes and ears on the ground. So do they take teachable moments with pupils? So when pupils are using devices, are they exploring safe use of technology? How will they report concerns of children accessing inappropriate content? If that happens in the classroom, are they clear on the processes for that, for reporting and recording? And do they take those opportunities to talk to pupils about safe, responsible use of technology? So there are many roles in your school who have a direct part to play in making sure that filtering is working and is effective for your pupils. So what I would say is it's really important that you establish those clear roles and responsibilities, that you have them outlined in your key policies, that you've spoken about filtering and monitoring and those responsibilities in training and made it very clear, maybe through the use of scenarios, maybe through the use of very clear guidance, so that everybody knows what they have to do, their part to play in filtering. Within the standards, it also talks about the need to let parents know what you are doing in school around online safety and around your filtering and monitoring. If you haven't told your parents about your filtering and monitoring, then we do have a template letter that you could utilise. So you can download this for free on our website, you can edit it, and then you could send that out to parents to let them know what you are doing in school and how you are filtering and monitoring their child's online activity. And within that, you could then take the opportunity to offer some support and guidance around what they might want to do and consider at home too. The next standard that we're going to explore is about how filtering systems should block harmful and inappropriate content without unreasonably impacting teaching and learning. It's tempting when we're thinking about filtering, especially from a safeguarding perspective, to think, let's just lock it all down. Let's just try and make it so strict that there cannot possibly be anything even mildly inappropriate that gets through our system. Now, the first thing to say is that is nigh on impossible unless you turn off your internet, because actually there are millions and billions of web pages out there, and it's very difficult to make sure that everything is 100% safe. But secondly, as the standard says, we don't want to be unreasonable in our approach to the extent where it impacts on teaching and learning. So to give you an example, sometimes we receive emails from schools saying, we don't want children seeing anything inappropriate, so we want to block the word sex on our filtering platform. Now that might seem like a good idea, but actually it's going to have quite wide unintentional consequences, and we would very much discourage schools from doing that, because we think you are at risk of over blocking in your school when you do that. Because by blocking the word sex on your filtering platform, you will probably block most of your RSHE curriculum resources. You are going to block resources to do with biology and the teaching of reproduction. You will also block websites that actually might be quite supportive and helpful for children if they're seeking support around something. And also it's likely to block a number of websites relating to county councils, so Essex County Council or Sussex. So it will have a negative impact on teaching and learning, and also the experience that children get of using the internet. We don't want to restrict things to the extent whereby what they're accessing at school is no longer a good resemblance of the internet, because what will happen is those children will probably go home to technologies which have no filtering on them whatsoever, and the behaviour that they exhibit at home will probably then be much more risky. We need to make the most of teachable moments in schools whereby something does come up on the screen, or maybe a child puts in a search term into a search engine and something comes back. We need to take those moments with children to teach them about why that potentially was not a good term to put into a search engine, how to make our search terms safer, what to do if we come across things online that make us feel uncomfortable or worried. We need to use those opportunities. We can't just block them out entirely. It will still happen, and if it's not happening at school, it will be happening at home. So we want to help children to be safe, responsible users of technology into the future. The guidance does allude to this fact, as I've mentioned, that no filtering system can be 100% effective all of the time. There are various reasons for this. Not only are new URLs being created every second of every day, and that makes it very hard to always be on top of categorization, but sometimes people are intentionally or otherwise trying to circumnavigate filtering. So whether that's through the use of VPNs, virtual private networks, maybe they are using different terminology and language to circumnavigate filtering. And sometimes some of the big technology companies actually make it quite difficult for effective filtering to take place. So there are lots of reasons why it cannot be 100% effective. So that's important to acknowledge, because sometimes things do happen. Content is accessed on the school network, but it's how we respond to that. What you're asked to do as a DSL and as a school is to understand what are the limitations of your filtering platform. So what are those limitations? Are there any ways to mitigate those limitations? And also, what is the coverage? So is your filtering active on all devices? What about guests and visitors who come into the school? If they're accessing your network, what level of filtering do they have? So understanding the coverage, understanding the limitations, and trying to mitigate risk wherever possible. So one of the ways in which you can start to consider this is to answer these three questions. What is allowed in your school? So what content, what URLs, what websites are allowed in your school? What is not? So what do you actively try to block? And more importantly is the why. So what is the rationale for those decisions? And as we've already said, filtering needs to be driven by safeguarding and safeguarding understanding. So that is why it's so important that the DSL is involved in the decision making around these questions. For example, sometimes we see many schools who have permitted access by pupils to sales sites, so shopping sites online. And from an IT perspective, you might think that's fine. From a safeguarding perspective, we know that you can buy many things that would be inappropriate on shopping sites online. So if you go onto Amazon or to Etsy or to eBay, you can buy lots of adult inappropriate things that we probably don't want our children accessing at school. So our recommendation in this particular case is that you block sales sites, because that is a safeguarding rationale and explanation. But if we left that down to a technical colleague to make that decision, they might not have that understanding and that knowledge. So that's why it's so important that as the DSL you are involved in those conversations. So it's not only what is allowed, what is blocked and why, but also thinking to whom. So who are we allowing certain web content to? Who are we blocking certain web content to? And also the question of when, because it might be that you have particular clubs, accessing your school or particular clubs operating in school, which might need access to particular content that actually otherwise would be blocked. So for example, if you have a computing club running in school, they might have access to a wider range of URLs than perhaps those pupils would during their curriculum time in school. So not only what, but also thinking about to whom and when. Those are really important questions for you to be able to answer. So if you don't feel like you confidently can answer these questions right now, this is a really important slide for you to take away and to discuss with your IT team. What is our approach in school? What is our rationale for what we block and allow, to whom and when? The non-negotiables in terms of content are those which you can see on the screen now. So these are areas of content that must be blocked. So as you can see, these three areas are illegal child abuse material, which is monitored by the IWF or the Internet Watch Foundation, unlawful terrorist content, which is through the CTIRU list, and also adult content, that which is age restricted, so perhaps pornographic content is what we most readily think about there. So these are three areas of content online that must be blocked for your users in school, and these are non-negotiables. If you're with LGfL, I could absolutely assure you that these three areas are blocked and that you cannot change that. There is no ability to override that on your system, and that should be the same for any filtering provider that you use in school. In addition to this, for LGfL schools, we also block a list known as PIPU, which is all to do with piracy and copyright material, and we also block a list from the Canadian authorities around child sexual abuse material, so you have that added layer. How you set your filtering up in your school can be different for different users, and in fact the DfE standards that say that at a minimum you should have different filtering policies set up for your staff compared to your pupils, so that's a minimum. But we think on top of that you really need to be thinking about who are your pupils and what kind of filtering experience do they need to have, and actually that might be different depending on the age of the child, but also any particular risk factors or vulnerabilities. So how the internet is filtered for a group of sixth formers is likely to be quite different to how it's filtered for Key Stage 3. So does the way in which your network is set up, your user groups are set up, does that allow for having this more granular user-based filtering experience? Speak to your IT team about that to make sure that your filtering is set up in the way that you need it to be personalised and to safeguard children depending on their particular risk factors. Also, just to think about your device ecosystem, you need to be making sure filtering is set up and active everywhere on school-based devices and on your school network. So that includes guests and visitors that might be coming into your school and connecting to your internet. It might be your staff and pupils that come into school with their own devices and they're trying to connect, and also school-based devices that go off-site. Are you assured? Where is your evidence that filtering is effective in all of those areas of school life, on all of your devices and across all of your networks in school? The next few slides I'm going to show you are going to show you examples of how these things look like on our School Protect system, our own filtering system at LGfL, but they should absolutely mirror across to any filtering system that you're using in school. Now, we've spoken about having an understanding of what is blocked and allowed in your school and for whom. The best way of looking at this to start with is through your categories on your filtering platform. So all URLs, all websites in the world are categorized. They go through a categorization engine and will end up being categorized to one or a number of different categories. So there are categories around sales sites, there are categories around alcohol sites, social media, web chat, and so forth. And as you can see on the screen, this is what it looks like on School Protect. On the left-hand side, you have the name of the category, and then you have a green and a red column. The green shows you the policy groups for whom that category is allowed in your school. So this will depend on how your policy groups are set up. So on the green side, you will see who is allowed to see that category of URLs, and on the red, it's who those category of URLs is blocked for. So this is a really good way to start exploring your filtering setup and to see what do we allow category wise and what do we block and for whom, and to, as we've already said, have that really clear rationale in your head of, well, why is that decision may be made. What's also helpful is underneath each of the categories on the left hand side, we give you a bit of text which explains what this category is, and sometimes we will also recommend whether we think it should be blocked or allowed for particular users. So if this is a new area of work for you and you're thinking, actually, I'm not quite sure whether this should be blocked or allowed for users in my school, hopefully the text on the left hand side should help you in making that decision. So categories is a great place to start, but what if you decide, for example, you want to block the games category, which we would suggest you do, but there is a particular game that you want your pupils to access because of it being needed for your maths curriculum. So we would suggest you keep the games category blocked, but that you allow specific URLs by exception. And you can do that through School Protect on your URL local list. So you can add any particular websites onto this list, and that then acts as an override or an exception rule to the categories that you've chosen on the previous slide. So if you wanted to allow a particular URL yourself, or your IT support team could put that into the local list here, and then that would override whatever you've decided in your categories page. Now, something just to note on this is that you can only block or allow individual web pages. So for example, bbc.co.uk is a website, but bbc.co.uk/xy3pz whatever, that is a web page. So there are many web pages in the bbc.co.uk website. If you wanted to block or allow a specific page on a site, you can only do that if you have enabled HTTPS decryption in your school. Now, those words probably won't mean anything to you, but it's important that you go to your IT support team and check with them that your school has enabled HTTPS decryption, because that will allow the filtering system to look at the entire URL or web address string. If you do not have HTTPS decryption in place, you can't do that. You can only block or allow the whole website. So you can't be particularly granular in your approach if you are not enabling HTTPS decryption. And that's something that we would recommend for all schools to do for a number of reasons, which will become apparent as we go through the further slides. Hopefully from what you're seeing so far is making you think, actually, I might need access to my filtering platform, and we would strongly recommend that DSLs do have access to their filtering provider's portal. Now, for LGfL customers, you can get access to School Protect, and we have different user types set up on School Protect. So we have an administrator role, and that will usually be your technical team, your IT support, and they can make all manner of changes to your filtering. But as a DSL, you probably don't want access to everything. You just want access to the elements which affect your role and the responsibilities that I'm talking about through with you today. So if you get set up as a policy editor, for example, that will give you access to things like your categories, your reporting, which I'll come on to talk about. And so that will give you the information you probably need to be able to perform your role. On the left-hand side, we've given you a few reasons as to why we think you should get access to your filtering platform, because hopefully it will just give you a bit more understanding and confidence in knowing how your filtering works, and to know the capabilities of what your filtering can and can't do. So whilst we're still talking about blocking inappropriate and harmful content to children, we need to speak about YouTube. So YouTube works in a different way to other websites. So you as a school need to first decide whether you're going to block or allow YouTube for your users. If you are deciding to allow it for any of your users, which we assume you probably will for your teachers, for example, you then need to decide which mode of YouTube you want them to have access to. So you can have strict restricted mode, moderate restricted mode, and open mode. And depending on which mode you're on, depends then on what type of content you can access. Now, you have to stick with your mode, so whatever mode you choose is the mode that is available across your network. You can't differentiate your mode for different user groups, so if you decide to go with open mode, that would be open mode for any users who have access to YouTube. You can't differentiate it. For example, you want open mode for your teachers but strict restricted for your pupils. You can't do that. There is a workaround so that if you need particular YouTube videos accessible to users, you can use Google Workspace to help you with that. And the detail of how to do that is in the YouTube page that you can see on the screen here. So I won't take up too much time talking about this, but if you want to understand better how YouTube works, then do head over to youtube.lgfl.net. And if you also want to check which mode of YouTube you're using in your school, then you can use our YouTube mode checker using the second URL there, youtubemode.lgfl.net. The next thing to just mention when we're still talking about blocking inappropriate content are search engines. So the first thing as a school is to decide, do you want to block or allow search engines? And we have two categories in School Protect about this. So you need to decide for those two categories whether you want to block or allow them and for whom. You are probably going to want to allow them, if only for your staff. So once you've decided whether you're going to allow them, the next thing to do will be to check that safe search is enforced on any search engines that you decide you're permitting the use of. Now, safe search is like your first line of defense when using a search engine. So it will filter out the most inappropriate and harmful content to users. So when you put in a search term, it will already filter out that harmful, inappropriate content if you've got safe search enforced. I just want to point out that this is absolutely by no means 100% perfect. We often hear from schools who say that children have put in search terms and the information served back is sometimes deemed inappropriate. That will be down to the algorithm of the search provider and what they deem to be appropriate or not. That's very difficult for us to have an effect on. But nonetheless, having safe search enforced is really important. So to check whether safe search is enforced on your devices, you can head over to the URL on the bottom of the slide here, and that will tell you whether it's turned on and, just as importantly, whether it is enforced. And by enforced, we mean it cannot be switched on and off by the user, because we don't want that to happen. So please head over to that check and make sure that safe search is there and that it is enforced for your devices and users. The next thing as a DSL that will be quite interesting and quite important for you is to then think about what reporting information does your filtering platform give you? What websites, what web pages are your users accessing or trying to access, and what information does that give us? So are there particular sites that users are trying to access that raises some concern relating to contextual harm? Or do we need to cover something in the curriculum because our children are trying to access particular types of websites? So do we need to, for example, cover misinformation and disinformation because they're trying to get to particular sites which we know contain a lot of mis and disinformation? So your filtering reports can be really helpful as a safeguarding lead for thinking about prevention and protection, as well as reacting to concerns. Now, remember that filtering is about what websites do we block or allow. If you want to better understand what pupils are actually doing on devices, what type of language they're using, then for that you will need monitoring and your monitoring reports. But filtering, you can get filtering reports which tells you what kind of content people are accessing or are trying to access. Now, on School Protect, as you can see from the slide, we have given DSLs access to our filtering dashboard, and we think that this should be really helpful for you. If you have been with LGfL for a long time and you are still receiving Excel spreadsheets that are emailed to you with rows and rows of information that's usually not very helpful, then please do pay attention and have a look at this new reporting dashboard, because we think it will be much more helpful for you. So on this dashboard, you can have a look at what your individual users are accessing or trying to access. You can see what are the most prolific categories that people are accessing or getting blocked. You can look at the search terms that people are putting into search engines and what that might tell you, because if you see terminology in there that you don't understand, you can then research and find out, is that a concern or not? So for example, we hear a lot of specific terminology used around incel culture. Now, it might be that a term comes up on your search term report and you think, I don't know what that is. You go off and research it, and actually it's related to incel culture. That gives you then the information and the evidence you need to perhaps think about, okay, what do we need to do to support and investigate particular pupils? What do we need to do around the curriculum, and so forth? So hopefully this dashboard will really help you to get an oversight of what's going on your school network and what kind of websites people are trying to access. And it's also helpful for really digging deep into particular issues. So if you are able to access School Protect and you're a policy editor, you will have access to this. So this should be really helpful for you in your DSL role. Just to point out though, 2 key things that you need to make sure are in place if you're using the reporting dashboard is you might have gaps in what you can see. And that is usually because you either haven't enabled HTTPS decryption, so that thing that I mentioned earlier that we would definitely recommend all schools have. And the other reason you might have gaps in your reporting dashboard is if you do not have user authentication set up, so you can't identify users on your filtering platform. You can only identify IP addresses. As I've already mentioned, the latter of those, user authentication, if you can't identify users, then you can't effectively respond to safeguarding concerns because you'll only see an IP address. You won't see a particular user. So that will make it very difficult for you as a DSL to investigate and respond to any specific safeguarding concerns. So just to point out that if you see any gaps on your reporting dashboard, they are probably because of not having HTTPS decryption and not having user authentication, both of which we highly recommend you go and ask your IT support team to set up. And just to end this section, as we're speaking about inappropriate and harmful content, wanted to just pay a bit of attention and talk about generative AI. It's obviously something that schools are having to think about more and more. Many children are now using AI for many different reasons, and so too are our teachers. It's really important that as schools we have done our strategic thinking about what we are permitting the use of in our schools and why. Again, that question of why, how does it link to our pedagogy? Why would we allow the use of any generative AI? How does it help our pupils? How does it help our staff and our administration or our teaching and learning? What questions does it answer? And there are lots of other things and considerations for you as a school to think about before you let your users start using any generative AI platforms. As LGfL, we have done a lot of work around this, and we've got lots of resources that are available for free for you to use. Most notably, we have an AI policy toolkit. So if you are yet to formalise your AI policy or your AI approach in school, then do have a look at that AI policy toolkit. It's a flexible guide with lots of things to ponder and think about with regards to your school's own approach with using AI. At a very basic level, our recommendation is that generative AI is not available to pupils in school. So we have an AI category on School Protect, and we would recommend that this is blocked for everybody, so pupils and staff, because there are many generative AI platforms and tools out there that are highly inappropriate to be used in school and that would allow access to inappropriate and harmful content. So our recommendation is that you block that category by default for everybody. But if you decide as a school that you want to allow specific AI tools or platforms for specific users, that you do that using your URL list. So you block everything by default, but you allow specific platforms and tools by exception. And when you do that, you need to think carefully about, have we done a data protection impact assessment? Are we clear about what the risks are? Are there any age restrictions on using a particular platform? Have we issued robust guidance on how to use a particular platform, and so forth? And all of that is covered in our AI policy toolkit. The third standard in the DfE filtering and monitoring standards is that schools should review your filtering and monitoring provision at least annually. Now, to support you to do this, LGfL have an online safety audit, and actually this is mentioned within Keeping Children Safe in Education, and we suggest that you complete your annual review of filtering and monitoring as part of your annual online safety audit. So we have incorporated a filtering and monitoring section into this template document. You can download this for free at our website, and you can work your way through the filtering and monitoring sections, which are that strategic review of whether the filtering and monitoring platforms that you have in school are working for you, whether you need to procure a new system, what your strategy is for using these systems, whether staff have had their training, whether your policies are updated, all of that kind of strategic function around filtering and monitoring systems. So you as a school need to have evidence that you have done that on an annual basis. When you do your online safety audit, we recommend that you do so as a collaborative process. So please don't feel that this is something that you as a DSL has to do on your own. We would recommend that, as per an earlier section in this training session, we explored the different roles who have a part to play in making sure that filtering is effective. So please do liaise with those key individuals to make sure that they have provided the information and evidence for you to complete that annual review. In the standard, the schools are also expected to carry out regular checks of their filtering systems. Now, it might sound that these are one of the same thing, but they are quite different. So as the DSL, you will be heavily involved in your annual review of filtering and monitoring, but the regular checks are more, is the filtering operating the way we would expect on every device for every person? So this is the day-to-day operational checks of filtering. When it comes to completing the checks, this is something that we think can be delegated out. It's not necessarily something that needs to be done by the DSL. So if you want to delegate this out to the IT support team, or you have other individuals in your staff population who can help with this, then that will help to ease the burden and the load on DSLs. To help your school with completing the regular checks, we have a template checks form that you can download from our website. We have an Excel version as well as a Word document version, and this takes you through some steps of how you go about testing that your filtering is active and operational. We've heard some stories from schools who perhaps do things in a bit of a worrying way, where perhaps they're typing in to try and access pornography sites on the school network to see whether they're blocked or not. That is a very high stakes approach. So please do have a look at the template checks form to make sure that you are carrying out those checks in an effective and safe way. And also just to point out that the DfE standards talk about you completing regular checks. Our recommendation as LGfL is that you would do these no less frequently than every term, so every 12 weeks. But that's for you as a school to decide, and that would be something that you probably record in your policy or in your annual review to decide how frequently you're going to carry out those checks and by whom and using what process. So although you might not be doing the regular checks, I'm sure as a DSL you will still want some reassurance that any actions that have fallen out of them, any remedial work is carried out for you to have assurance that the filtering system is still effective for your pupils at school. And whilst we're talking about checks, another thing that might help you in school in carrying out your filtering checks is this site that we set up called Am I Filtering? If you go onto Am I Filtering, you can see whether School Protect or Home Protect is effective on your particular device. If you are an LGfL customer, you can go to this web page and it will tell you here and now whether your device is being filtered and by which product, and then give you the list of categories which are allowed or blocked for you as a particular user. So that's quite helpful for carrying out those regular checks. The next slide, this is a big list of links that may help you as you go through your next steps of how to implement the information that you've heard here today. I also mentioned that we run technical training. Please do ask the question as to whether your IT support team have been on this training recently, and perhaps inquire as to whether they need to refresh their knowledge. And the last thing for me to tell you about is monitoring. Now, we have focused purely on filtering during this session, but the fourth standard of the DfE filtering monitoring standards is about monitoring, so please don't miss that out when you read through that document. And just like you're expected to have an appropriate filtering system in place, you are expected to have appropriate monitoring too. If you want a reminder about the difference between filtering and monitoring, then head over to our Safe Filtering webpage, and on there you'll find a short video which gives you an overview of the differences between those two platforms. And as LGfL, we are in partnership with a leading monitoring provider called Senso, and we are able to offer schools 2 different monitoring platforms. Now, if you are an LGfL customer, please make sure that you are making use of the free unmanaged monitoring that we're able to offer to you. So that is a product that is available to all schools to purchase, but for LGfL schools, you will usually be entitled to get that for free as part of your broadband subscription. But we also offer a more enhanced service too, which is a paid for service for all schools, and that is our managed monitoring service. So for any information about the monitoring services that are on offer from LGfL, do head over to our webpage. We hope that the session has been helpful for you as a DSL. Please don't feel that you're on your own after watching this. Go back to the links in one of the previous slides and have a look at all of the information available to you. In particular, if you are an LGfL DSL, then do have a look at the DSL guide that we have created on how to use School Protect. Hopefully it's quite accessible and it walks you through how you can use the portal and the different functions, so how to use the dashboard, how to use the health check, how to access the categories. So we hope that that's really helpful for you. If you have any further questions, do not hesitate to contact us via email, and our email address is on the slide now. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again another day.